Welcome to our machine learning final project video. Our project idea was to analyze the current bias in the US political news landscape. My name is Elvin Kong. I am a sophomore studying computer science and mathematics.
And my name is Peng, and I am a junior studying computer science and minoring in mathematics.
With the recent election of President Donald Trump and the past election season, we decided that it would be interesting to take a look at how polarized the news industry actually was. Trump has been constantly complaining about the quote-unquote fake news, and that the news corporations are all biased against him. We decided to take matters into our own hands to try and determine just which news sites were particularly biased, or if there were in fact any that were still neutral.
Our main goal for this project is to screen and classify the political bias of news articles from various news sources, and to recommend news stations that are either less biased or have equal distributions of positive and negative articles on both Democratic and Republican parties. Some expectations that we had were that right-leaning news sources such as Fox News would have a Republican bias. This would include articles that would be talking about Democrats with negative sentiment and articles talking about Republicans with a positive sentiment. On the other hand, we expected left-leaning news sources such as the Huffington Post to have articles with a Democratic bias. This would include articles talking about Democrats with positive sentiment and Republicans with a negative sentiment.
Given the time constraints, we were only able to gather roughly 100 articles from each of the 10 major news websites that we had chosen. For the first 5 sites, I created a Python scraper to pull the links and articles from the RSS feeds. Some of the Python modules that were used included feed parser, URL lib, and Beautiful Soup 4. For the second 5 news sources, Erica brute forced and manually downloaded each of the 100 articles. We first hand-labeled 190 articles from the article pool as either 1, 2, or 3. This would correspond to whether the article's subject was about Democrats, neutral topics, or Republicans. We defined neutral to be either talking about both Democrats and Republicans, or neither.
Some pre-processing that we performed on these articles were lowercasing and stemming. To do this, we utilized the stemming.porter2 Python module. We also performed the normalization of URLs, email addresses, and numbers, and also removed all punctuation and special characters from the articles by iterating through each article and keeping only letters, using ASCII codes. After this, we consolidated each article into one line of a single file. Here's an example of an article before being pre-processed. The first line contains the link to the article, and below it is the rest of the article. Here's the same article after it has been processed.
Our goal was to use the multi-class support vector machine to generate labels for the over 800 remaining articles. We first split the label data into training and testing sets of 100 and 90 articles respectively. Using the words found in those articles, we created feature vectors for the training and test datasets, which included 3,233 total features. After training the SVM model, we found that a penalty parameter C of 1.2 and a gamma of 1 over 200 maximized the prediction accuracy on the testing set. We then used the model to classify the remaining 816 unlabeled articles. In total, we actually only found 14 articles labeled as 1, or Democrat, 269 articles labeled as 2, or neutral, and the remaining 723 articles were labeled as 3, or Republican.
To perform sentiment analysis, we utilized the Natural Language Toolkit, otherwise known as NLTK, which is trained on both Twitter sentiment as well as movie reviews. This toolkit has an API which takes HTTP posts with a text to classify and returns in JSON format a dictionary containing the label and probabilities. The possible labels are pos, neg, and neutral, and the pos and neg probabilities sum to 1. The neutral probability is standalone, and if the neutral probability is higher than 0.5, the label will be neutral. To then perform sentiment analysis, we did HTTP posts to the NLTK API for each article. After doing this, we found that most articles were initially classified as neutral, since news articles tend to naturally be much more neutral than Twitter posts and movie ratings. Therefore, to counter this, we calculated the average neutral probability and then went through the articles again to relabel the sentiments wherever applicable. For example, for a given article, if it was labeled as neutral, but the neutral probability was less than the average neutral probability, then we would relabel it as either pos or neg, depending on which probability was higher. After performing SVM and sentiment analysis, here are the results that we obtained.
Feel free to pause the video over the next couple of slides to get a closer look at our specific results. We found that the most distinguishing features from these results were that Fox News was actually more balanced than we had initially expected. NBC News was actually the only source that had a positive Democratic article. Washington Post had the highest percentage of positive Republican articles. USA Today had the most even distribution of articles out of the 10 different news sources. LA Times had the highest percentage of neutral topics, and both LA Times and CBS News had very little positive things to say about Republicans in comparison to the other sources. And all we can glean from ABC News and CNN News is that everyone is very focused on the Republican Party right now.
For results, we found that the most neutral news outlets were USA Today and Bloomberg. Some possible explanations for this is that most articles since the election have been covering Trump, and recent articles talking about Democrats also mention Republicans in them. Additionally, we only were able to get 100 articles per news source, and having more news articles would have given a more accurate representation of each news source.
As we were downloading articles, we realized that news sources did not only have written articles. To come up with a better representation of each news source, we should consider analyzing a mixture of both video news reports and news articles in our dataset. Another question was to research how polarized the news landscape had become, and we would do this by taking a look at articles from further in the past, i.e., articles from before the recent election and how they compare to current results. That marks the end of our final project using machine learning to perform political bias analysis. Thank you for watching, and thank you to Professor Ross, Nishen, and Autumn for a great semester.